What's up everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today let's talk about Amazon Prime's new anthology horror series, Them. When I first saw the promos for Them, I was immediately intrigued because it reminded me so much of Jordan Peele's film Us that came out back in 2019. We all know how much of a success that movie was, so I figured this series was going to be a mixture of both of his successful films, Get Out and Us, so I was fairly excited. You can also see the creator of the series, Little Marvin, was influenced by Jordan Peele's work, and that's how it is as a writer or artist in general. You get inspired and you emulate what was done and turn that into your own creation. Them is set in the 1950s and the story follows the Emerys, a black family who moves from North Carolina to an all-white neighborhood in Compton, California. The Emery family is then tormented not only by their evil racist white neighbors, but also by supernatural forces. As I'm watching the show, I noticed that a lot of the actors looked really familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it at the time until it finally came to me. The oldest daughter, Ruby Emery, is actress Shahadi Wright-Joseph, who is also in Us. The father, Henry Emery, is British rapper and actor Ashley Thomas, who is better known by his stage name, Bashy. Alison Peele has also had numerous roles in other projects such as American Horror Story Cult and Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen. There's also Paula J. Parker, who voiced Trudy Proud from the Proud Family, and y'all, literally I would recognize that voice anywhere. And there's also Jason Stackhouse, aka Ryan Quanten, so this series had a lot of familiar faces attached to it. Before I dive deep into my review and spoilers for the series, I must say, all of the actors did an amazing job. From the actors that played the Emery family like Deborah Arende, Ashley Thomas, Shahadi Wright-Joseph, and Melody Hurd, they were amazing at portraying these characters and the horrors they were facing, be it the racism or supernatural horror. The acting was top tier and done really well, and also from the actors who played the racist white people. They were very convincing, a little too convincing at times to the point where I wanted to jump through the screen and fight all of them, but I have this saying that if you're an actor playing a villain and you can make me hate you, then you're doing your job right. I also have to talk about the cinematography and aesthetic of the series. It definitely showed the perfect picture of what America looked like in the 50s. From the clothing, the colorful houses, and tone of the series, it definitely made me feel like I was in 1953. Also, the supernatural elements were done very well. The special effects were all A1. The entity Miss Vera and how she was shown at the end of the first episode in the kitchen was definitely creepy and had me hyped all at the same time. Now I gotta say this shit right here is really dark and triggering, so if you don't like hearing things about death of children, racism, black trauma, and you don't want any spoilers, I advise you to stop watching now. Now usually when I review movies or TV shows, I rewatch it a second time because I might have missed something or didn't pick up on a few things during my first watch, but I refuse to watch this again. The series was so hard to get through because you will be mad every single episode and every single scene. Let's talk about the Emery family more in depth and the entities that manifested their way into their minds. Lucky is the wife and pretty much the heart of the family. She grows through something that no one should ever have to go through, and I hated how her husband and children didn't really give her the space to fully grieve and deal with it. Lucky is the one who goes through the most trauma in the series, and the entity that she is constantly seeing is the man in the black hat / the Reverend. Everyone, including her own husband and kids, acts as if she's crazy. Not only is she dealing with evil in the supernatural world, but also in the physical world as well. She and her family are constantly tormented by these white racists in the neighborhood, and anytime Lucky gets angry like any normal person would, she is being portrayed as a crazy, mad black woman, knowing that she's only reacting to what they're doing to her and her family. Then there's Henry. Henry migrates his family to Compton after what happened to Lucky and their son Chester. He gets a new job as an engineer and he's hoping to start over. Henry did a few things in the show I couldn't get with, like why would he move his family to an all-white suburb after the trauma Lucky went through at the hands of white people. But then I had to remember this was during the Great Migration. For those who don't know, the Great Migration occurred during the 1910s to 1970s, where 6 million African American families moved from the South to the West, Midwest, and Northeast for better opportunities and to get away from the Jim Crow laws. Henry doesn't even tell her about the deed he's signing, where it clearly states no person of Negro blood should own this land or reside in this house, and she finds this out right when they're moving in. Henry also doesn't want to hear his wife out when she is telling him that she's seeing things. He wants her to act like everything is normal even when he's seeing weird things happening too. An entity that Henry is constantly seeing is a blackface tap dancing Sambo character, And the way I interpreted this was that this entity manifested itself and attached to Henry because it shows how Henry wants to be accepted by his white colleagues and his white boss, when they only view him as the Sambo tap dancing character. There was an elevator scene where Henry, his boss, and another white man are all in the elevator, and the white guy drops his pen on the ground. It takes him a few moments, but Henry soon picks up the pen and hands it to him. I think this further symbolizes Henry wanting white approval in his workplace. We see how Henry deals with his racist boss and how vile his boss is, and every time his boss is spewing racism at Henry, Henry is constantly replying back saying yes sir over and over and over again. And you can visibly see he's angry and he's clutching his fist so hard to the point where his hands are bleeding. And in another scene, we see he goes into a bathroom stall, puts a ton of paper towels over his mouth so he can scream. And then there's the oldest Emory daughter, Ruby Lee. There is this scene where Ruby is in class and she raises her hands to answer a question, and all the kids start making ape sounds and monkey noises at her. And just the look on her face of hurt, fear, and discomfort will really make you angry. Shahadi's portrayal of this scene was on point and so good. And I saw the interview where the cast said that they had a therapist on set that they could talk to decompress after they did scenes like this, which I think is pretty amazing coming from the producers and showrunners to make sure that these actors are okay mentally and emotionally after doing these scenes, because again, this show is a lot. But back to this scene, Ruby's teacher is just as trifling. She writes a note for Ruby to go to the principal's office, and on the note it says something about causing a class disturbance or disrupting class. While waiting at the principal's office, Ruby meets a girl named Doris. I was hoping Doris was one of the few non-racist white people in this show, just so we can give these characters a break, but it's later revealed that Doris is actually a demonic entity manifesting itself into Ruby's life. Doris is pretty much what Ruby views as the standard of beauty, a pretty, blonde, blue-eyed white girl. The entity places thoughts in Ruby's head that she should be white, which causes Ruby to paint her face and hands in white paint. And lastly is Gracie Jean. Gracie is the youngest Emory daughter, and due to her wanting to be a teacher like her mother, she is haunted by an entity named Miss Vera. Gracie is always told by her mother to mind her teachers, and throughout the series we see Gracie with this book where Miss Vera is teaching her things, and it's evident that Gracie is starting to lean on Miss Vera more than Lucky, as she says things like Miss Vera says this and Miss Vera says that, until she realizes she needs to stop listening to Miss Vera and start listening to her mother. Like I said, this show mixes up racism with horror, and we get backstory to this as it's revealed in episode 9 that the man in the black hat was a reverend who lost his son and wife and began to lose his faith in God. He sees a little boy laying naked in a field and takes him in. Later on in this episode, there is a black couple, a man and his pregnant wife, whose wagon broke down. So the reverend offered them his community to stay in while he got their wagon fixed. The people in the community were so intimidated and had so much hatred for these black people because the man found out where they needed to dig to find more water, and the woman knew how to sew very well. They assumed that they were witches and it must be black magic because, in their minds, black people can't be this smart. Mind you, the Reverend was starting to lose his sight, and as he's losing his sight, he starts to see the black couple as some sort of demonic creatures. He assumes they were witches, so he and his townspeople round them up and proceed to burn their eyes out of their sockets. And if that wasn't enough, they burned them alive. Mind you, while all of this is going on, the woman is going into labor. The little kid is revealed to be Satan, who deceived him, and the Reverend made a pact with the devil that he would cause hell to any black person who steps foot on that land. And we flash forward back into the 1950s, and that land is now Compton, California. So for me, the biggest downfall of this series is that it focused on 90% racism and black trauma and only 10% supernatural horror, when it should have been the exact opposite. Had this movie had a supernatural lore to it that had nothing to do with racism or black trauma, it would have been so much better. The main horror from this season is the actual racism and black trauma being shown, and it was shown in every single episode, in every single scene. It will infuriate you, and no one wants to watch a show and be mad the entire time they're watching. Not only that, but nothing really happens the first 4 episodes other than excessive racism and microaggression. You're watching the first 4 episodes, and the supernatural elements, they come in here and maybe there, but not much until maybe episode 6. I'm gonna be honest, I almost tapped out after episode 5, and if you saw episode 5, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think people need to understand that we're tired of seeing black people, but more so dark-skinned black people on TV dealing with struggle, trauma, racism, and police brutality. We see so much racism and police brutality in the media in our everyday life already, so when we turn on the TV, we want to escape our world too, just like everyone else. We want to see ourselves in mystery thrillers solving murder mysteries, in fantasy films as witches, werewolves, and vampires, and we want to watch ourselves in cult classic comedy films or coming of age movies. Granted to you, there is nothing wrong with telling stories about racism, microaggression, segregation, police brutality, and slavery because it's something that is heavy in American history. It's something that should never be forgotten or ignored. But at the same time, there needs to be a balance. We want movies and TV shows about dark-skinned black people that don't depict those stories as well. It's okay to have a variety of supernatural and mystery films and movies with dark-skinned people and not let all of them tie back into racism or black struggle. Now I know what some of you guys are going to say. This takes place in the 50s where our ancestors experienced this non-stop on a daily basis. And yeah, I know, but the point of most fictional television shows is for entertainment and to escape your reality. My problem with this series wasn't that it had racism in it. My problem with it has a lot to do with the fact that I'm seeing it in every single scene and the Emerys are just taking it. There is no retaliation, no vengeance. You're literally just watching black people suffering and dealing with pain for no reason. I understand in the real world, in that time, blacks couldn't retaliate because it will only end badly. But this is a fictional TV show. I'm gonna put it like this. Remember in American Horror Story Coven when a black boy was killed by a group of white men just because the school he was attending was starting to become integrated? In the very next scene, Marie Laveau rose the dead and the racist white men had a brutal and disturbing death. We immediately saw Marie Laveau seek vengeance, and I wish this show would have taken the same approach with this. The family didn't fight back at all. Even though Lucky wanted to, her husband Henry was so against fighting them back. It took 6 episodes for Lucky to slap the cigarette smoke out of Betty's mouth. The family as a whole doesn't really fight back against the neighbors until the last episode. We still don't see them fully get justice or vengeance. Things end off ambiguous and we're left to believe that they didn't have a happy ending. Diving deeper into this, I found it very odd that this being a horror series, the only horror we saw was being done to the black family. Let's talk about Betty Wendell for a minute so I can better explain. Think of Betty as Karen's grandmother from the 1950s. Betty is the one who is more heavy in wanting to get the Emery family out of their neighborhood. She's the typical racist white woman who is always in black people's business. She is in black people's business so much that she is unaware of the white people in her life who are actually betraying her, such as her father who sexually abused her husband who is secretly gay, and the milkman who has a crazy obsession with her. She goes to George with the intention of him harming the Emery family, but he ends up holding her down in the bomb shelter environment underground against her will. This doesn't last long at all because Betty ends up getting out of the shelter fairly easy, but as she's running across the field getting a taste of freedom, George shoots her dead. And my only issue with this being the fact that this is a horror series, I expected Betty to be down there for a good minute and for the milkman to torture her and later kill her character off with a disturbing death because they had no problem with showing Lucky being violently raped, showing a black man being hung, a black couple getting their eyes burned out of their sockets, or showing a black infant being placed in a pillowcase and being thrown around until he dies. On the contrary, when the white people die in this show, like Betty, the cop, the white guy in the basement, it's something that's done quick, straight to the point, which further proves the narrative that their intention was to only show black people being tortured. There was also a brief subplot in the first few episodes of the season where one of Betty's friends didn't seem to care too much that the Emery family moved in because her husband got a new job and they were moving. There's this scene where Betty finds this out, and the entire time you're watching, you can see Betty having a mental breakdown, and the scene is constantly building up as if we're about to see her snap. You truly believe that Betty is about to kill this woman and dispose of her body, but nope, it doesn't happen. Like any moment they could have shown white people having a traumatic experience or a terrible death, it doesn't happen. The only time we come close to this is when Marty gets his leg broken and stomped on by Clark after he called him a homophobic slur. This series has so much potential to be really great. You had amazing actors, amazing cinematography, and amazing supernatural effects. And if they would have focused more so on the malevolent entities and not the racist white people in the physical world, the series would have been so much better. Overall, I give the season a C-. This is an anthology series and the show was already picked up for a second season, so we will be getting a completely different story. I would love to see the same actors in the next season because again, I feel like they all did an amazing job. But I want the new horror story being told not to be linked back to black trauma and racism. If you saw the series, what are some things you liked and disliked, and what do you want to see happen the next season?